The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare Airport flickered as Marcus Chen stared at the departure board. Gate 13. Flight 447 to Denver. In that instant, his vision blurred, metal twisted. Flames consumed the cabin. Screams echoed through his mind. His hands trembled as the premonition faded, leaving only one terrifying certainty. Everyone on that plane would die. The boarding announcement crackled overhead, and Marcus knew he had minutes to change everything. The sterile air of Terminal 3 carried the familiar mix of coffee, cleaning chemicals, and the nervous energy of hundreds of travelers. Marcus gripped the metal armrest of his chair, his knuckles white against the brushed steel. The vision had lasted only seconds, but every detail burned in his memory like a brand. "Marcus, you okay?" Sarah's voice cut through the fog of his terror. She sat beside him, her psychology textbook forgotten in her lap, green eyes studying his pale face with concern. He blinked, focusing on her freckled features, trying to ground himself in reality. Something's wrong with the plane." Jake looked up from his phone, eyebrow raised. "What do you mean wrong?" "Like mechanically?" His business ethics assignment lay scattered on the seat beside him, forgotten. The boarding announcement echoed through the gate area. Flight 447 to Denver. Now boarding all passengers. The cheerful tone of the gate agent seemed almost mocking against the dread crawling up Marcus's spine. "We can't get on that plane," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, pathetic even. How could he explain what he'd seen? The engine exploding in a ball of orange flame, the cabin filling with smoke, the horrible sound of metal tearing apart at 30,000 feet. Sarah reached for his hand, her touch warm against his cold skin. "You're having another anxiety attack. Remember what we talked about?" Deep breaths. But this wasn't anxiety. Marcus had felt anxiety before. The crushing weight of finals, the suffocating pressure of his parents' expectations. This was different. This was knowledge. Terrible and absolute. "Listen to me," he said, turning to face them both. The gate area buzzed with activity around them. Families gathering their carry-ons. Business travelers checking their phones one last time. Normal people doing normal things, unaware they were about to board a flying coffin. The engine's going to explode. "I saw it happen. The whole plane ... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Dude, when was the last time you slept? You've been stressed about that thermodynamics exam. This isn't about school." Marcus's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby passengers. He forced himself to lower it, leaning closer to his friends. "I know how this sounds, but we cannot get on that plane." The departure board above them flickered, the digital display momentarily scrambling before settling back to normal. Marcus's breath caught. For just a moment, the letters had seemed to rearrange themselves, spelling out words that made his blood run cold. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do you want us to do?" The simple acceptance in her voice nearly broke him. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes, but she was willing to trust him anyway. "We missed the flight. Tell him we're sick, or there's a family emergency. Anything." Marcus pulled out his phone, hand shaking as he opened his airline app. "I'll see if I can change our tickets to tomorrow." Jake stood up, pacing a small circle in front of their seats. "Marcus, man, this is crazy. We have that group presentation on Monday. If we miss this flight, if we get on this flight, we're all dead." The certainty in Marcus's voice stopped Jake mid-step. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The boarding announcement came again, more urgent this time. Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Denver. "All remaining passengers please report to Gate 13 immediately." Marcus watched as the last few stragglers hurried toward the jet bridge, dragging their carry-ons behind them. A family with 2 young children. A businessman talking loudly into his phone. An elderly couple holding hands. They were all going to die, and there was nothing he could do to save them. Final call, Flight 447 to Denver. The gate agent began gathering her papers, preparing to close the flight. Marcus felt a mix of relief and horror wash over him. Relief that his friends wouldn't be on that plane. Horror at what was about to happen to everyone who was. 20 minutes after Flight 447's departure, Marcus sat hunched over his laptop in the airport's food court, frantically refreshing news websites. Sarah had gone to get them coffee, while Jake made calls to rearrange their Monday presentation. The ambient noise of the terminal conversations, announcements, the rumble of luggage wheels felt surreal against the weight of what Marcus knew was coming. Still nothing, he muttered, clicking refresh again. His leg bounced nervously under the table, a habit Sarah was always trying to help him break. Jake returned, sliding into the seat across from him. Okay, I talked to Professor Williams. He's giving us an extension until Wednesday. He paused, studying Marcus's face. You still think something's going to happen? Before Marcus could answer, Sarah appeared with 3 steaming cups of coffee. She set them down carefully, the ceramic clinking against the metal table. Any word? Marcus shook his head, then froze. His laptop screen flickered, the browser window distorting for a fraction of a second. In that moment, the words on the news site seemed to rearrange themselves. Flight 447. Engine failure, no survivors. He blinked, and the screen returned to normal. Just airline stock prices and weather reports. Did you see that? He asked, voice tight. See what? Sarah followed his gaze to the laptop screen, but there was nothing there. Just mundane news about traffic delays and a water main break on the south side. Marcus's phone buzzed. A news alert. His heart stopped as he read the preview. Breaking. Mechanical issue forces. Flight 447 to return to O'Hare. Oh my God, he breathed, showing them the alert. They're coming back. Sarah leaned over to read, her hair brushing his shoulder. Emergency landing. All passengers and crew reported safe. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Marcus, how did you? I don't know. The relief was overwhelming, but underneath it lurked a darker realization. His vision had been wrong. Or had it? Maybe he'd changed something by convincing them not to board. Maybe. The departure board, 20 feet away, began to flicker, its LED display cycling through flight information at an impossible speed. Other travelers paused to look, some taking pictures of the malfunctioning screen. But Marcus saw something else in the chaos of scrambled numbers and letters. Words forming in the digital static. Not yet. Soon. Jake followed his gaze to the board, now displaying normal flight information again. The screens have been glitching all day. Probably need to update their software. But Marcus knew better. The message had been for him. Death wasn't finished with Flight 447. It was just ... delayed. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Unknown number. Hello. Static crackled through the speaker, punctuated by what sounded like distant screaming. Then, clearly, a voice he recognized, the gate agent from Flight 447. The manifest was wrong. You were supposed to be on this flight. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his hands trembling. Sarah and Jake were looking at him with concern, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. Who was it? Sarah asked. Wrong number, Marcus lied. He couldn't tell them what he'd heard. They'd think he was having a complete breakdown. Around them, the food court continued its normal rhythm. Families shared meals. Travelers checked their phones. Airport employees went about their duties. But Marcus felt a shift in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm when all the birds fall silent. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then returned to their steady fluorescent glow. But in that brief darkness, Marcus had seen something that made his blood freeze. Shadowy figures standing behind each of his friends, tall and unnaturally thin, with eyes that reflected the terminal's artificial light like a cat's. When the light steadied, the figures were gone. But the feeling remained, the certainty that they were being watched, measured, judged. Death hadn't been cheated. It had simply chosen to play a longer game. Sarah's hand found his across the table. "Maybe we should get a hotel room for tonight. You look exhausted." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. As they gathered their things, he caught sight of their reflection in the food court's window. 3 college students, young and alive, with their whole futures ahead of them. But in the glass, for just a moment, he saw something else. 3 empty chairs where they had been sitting. 3 names being crossed off an invisible list. The game had begun. The Hampton Inn near O'Hare felt like a sanctuary compared to the airport's oppressive atmosphere. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the planes taking off and landing in the distance. Each streak of light against the dark sky made his stomach clench with remembered terror. Sarah emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp from the shower. "Feel better?" she asked, settling beside him on the bed. "A little?" It was a lie. The vision from Gate 13 played on repeat in his mind, but now it was mixed with new images. The flickering departure board, the impossible phone call, the shadowy figures he'd glimpsed in the food court. Jake sprawled across the second bed, his laptop open as he worked on their presentation. "I still can't believe you called that mechanical failure," he said without looking up. "What are the odds?" Before Marcus could answer, the television in the corner flickered to life on its own. No one had touched the remote, which sat on the nightstand between the beds. The screen displayed static for a moment, then resolved into a news broadcast. Extraordinary circumstances surrounding Flight 447's emergency landing at O'Hare Airport earlier today. Initial reports suggest a catastrophic engine failure was narrowly averted when 3 passengers failed to board the aircraft, causing a brief delay that may have saved dozens of lives. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Sarah grabbed the remote, but the channel wouldn't change. The volume buttons didn't respond either. A spokesperson for the airline declined to comment on reports that the missing passengers had expressed concerns about the flight's safety before departure. The 3 Northwestern University students. The screen went black. Jake was sitting up now, laptop forgotten. Did they mention us by name? No, Sarah said quickly, but her voice was uncertain. They said 3 students. That could be anyone. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. A plane was taking off in the distance, its lights blinking against the cloudy sky. For a moment, it seemed to hang motionless in the air, defying gravity and logic. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. "We need to get out of Chicago," he said. "What?" Sarah turned to face him. "Marcus, we just got here. Our flight home isn't until Sunday. Something's wrong. The phone call, the news report, the way the TV turned on by itself." He gestured toward the black screen. "None of this is normal." Jake closed his laptop with a snap. "Okay, I'm officially worried about you. You predicted a mechanical failure grade. You've got good instincts. But now you're seeing conspiracies everywhere." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. They all froze. "Housekeeping," came a muffled voice from the hallway. Sarah checked her phone. "It's almost midnight. Hotels don't do housekeeping this late." The knock came again, more insistent this time. Marcus approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. The hallway was empty, lit by the harsh fluorescent strips that made everything look sickly and pale. No housekeeping cart, no person in sight. "There's no one there," he whispered. As if in response to his words, the doorknob began to turn slowly, despite the deadbolt being engaged. The metal groaned under some invisible pressure, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Jake was off the bed in an instant, crossing to the door and throwing his shoulder against it. The turning stopped. "What the hell?" he breathed. The lights in their room began to flicker, the same pattern Marcus had seen at the airport. on and off, with perfect rhythm. During the moments of darkness, shadows seemed to move across the walls, tall, thin shapes that didn't correspond to any of the furniture in the room. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "I want to leave. Now." They threw their belongings into their bags with desperate speed. Jake kept one hand on the door while he packed, as if his presence alone could keep whatever was outside from entering. "The stairs," Marcus said as they prepared to leave. "We take the stairs, not the elevator." The hallway was empty when they emerged, but the air felt thick and oppressive, like the moments before a violent storm. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being reflected by surfaces that weren't there. The stairwell was worse. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows that seemed to reach for them as they descended. Behind them, Marcus could hear the soft whisper of footsteps that matched their pace exactly, always staying just out of sight. They burst through the lobby doors like swimmers breaking the surface after too long underwater. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of jet fuel and rain. "My car," Sarah said, fumbling for her keys. Her hands were shaking. As they loaded their bags into her Honda Civic, Marcus caught sight of their hotel room window. 4 floors up, a figure stood there, silhouetted against the curtains. Tall and impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed like distant stars. He blinked, and the window was empty. "Drive," he said as they climbed into the car. "Just drive." As they pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Interstate 94, Marcus looked back one last time. Every window in the Hampton Inn was now occupied by the same tall, thin figure. They stood perfectly still, watching the car disappear into the night. Death had given them a head start, but the game was far from over. Interstate 94 stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Illinois darkness. Sarah kept her hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white in the glow of the dashboard lights. Jake had claimed the passenger seat, leaving Marcus alone in the back with his spiraling thoughts, and the growing certainty that they were driving towards something worse than what they'd left behind. "Where exactly are we going?" Jake asked, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine and road noise. "Away," Marcus replied, watching the mile markers flash by. "Just away from Chicago." The radio had been cycling through static-filled stations for the past hour, occasionally picking up fragments of late-night talk shows or country music before dissolving back into white noise. But now, as they passed the sign for Kalamazoo, it suddenly locked onto a clear signal. Reports continued to come in about the unusual atmospheric disturbances over the Midwest. Meteorologists are calling it an unprecedented weather pattern, with electromagnetic interference affecting everything from cell towers to aircraft navigation systems. Sarah reached for the dial to change the station, but Marcus stopped her. "Wait, listen." Most disturbing are the eyewitness accounts from O'Hare Airport, where passengers reported seeing figures that appeared and disappeared in the terminal's reflective surfaces. Airport security has released no official statement, but sources close to the investigation suggest. The radio cut to static again, then silence. "That's just coincidence," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "People see weird stuff in airports all the time. Stress, lack of sleep." Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, suddenly lit up with an incoming call. Unknown number. It rang once, twice, then stopped. A text message appeared. "Mile marker 127. Exit now." They were approaching mile marker 127. "Don't," Marcus said as Sarah's hand moved toward the turn signal. "Whatever this is, we don't follow its instructions." But even as he spoke, he could see the exit approaching, a lonely off-ramp leading to a road that disappeared into thick woods. The overhead sign was partially obscured by something that looked like fog but moved wrong, swirling in patterns that defied the wind. Sarah drove past the exit, but Marcus noticed her foot had eased off the gas. They were slowing down. "Sarah?" She blinked as if waking from a dream. "Sorry, I felt like I was supposed to turn there." In the rearview mirror, Marcus watched the exit recede. But there, standing at the bottom of the off-ramp under a flickering streetlight, was the same tall figure from the hotel window. It raised one impossibly long arm in what might have been a wave or a warning. Jake's phone buzzed with a text. Then Marcus's. Then Sarah's GPS system activated on its own, the mechanical voice cutting through the car's speakers, recalculating route. "In 1 mile, make a U-turn. Turn off the GPS," Marcus said. Sarah fumbled with the dashboard controls, but the voice continued. "Make a U-turn. Make a U-turn. Your destination is behind you." Jake was reading the text on his phone, his face pale in the green glow of the screen. These are all the same message. Mile marker 127. You cannot outrun what follows. And they're coming from ... double quotes. He scrolled through the sender information. They're coming from our own phones. We're texting ourselves. A semi-truck appeared in their rearview mirror, its headlights blazing like the eyes of some mechanical predator. It was moving fast, too fast for the wet conditions. The driver seemed intent on overtaking them, but every time Sarah tried to move to the right lane to let it pass, the truck moved with them. "He's not trying to pass," Marcus realized. "He's hurting us." The truck's horn blared, not the standard honk of an 18-wheeler, but a sound like a foghorn, deep and mournful and utterly wrong. In response, cars began appearing from the on-ramps ahead of them. An old sedan with one working headlight. A pickup truck with Mississippi plates. A minivan with all its windows tinted black. They formed a loose convoy around Sarah's Civic, matching their speed exactly, boxing them in. "This isn't real," Sarah whispered. "This can't be real." But the cars were solid enough. When she tried to change lanes, they moved to block her. When she accelerated, they accelerated. When she slowed down, they slowed down. The GP's voice had become more insistent. "Make a U-turn. Make a U-turn. Return to mile marker 127. Then, impossibly, the road ahead began to curve. Interstate 94 had been straight for miles, but now it was bending in a wide arc, turning them around despite Sarah's efforts to keep the wheel steady. "The road's not supposed to do that," Jake said, his voice high with panic. Marcus watched the mile markers count backward. 135, 134, 133. They were being pulled back toward whatever waited at mile marker 127, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The other cars began to peel away as they approached the exit, disappearing into the darkness as mysteriously as they had appeared. Only the semi-truck remained, now directly behind them, its headlights filling their car with harsh white light. "We have to take the exit," Sarah said, her hands no longer fully controlling the steering wheel. The car seemed to be driving itself now, drawn by some invisible force. As they descended the off-ramp, Marcus caught a glimpse of the truck driver in the side mirror. The cab was empty. No one was behind the wheel. The road led them deep into the woods, where ancient trees pressed close on either side, and the fog moved with purpose, reaching for their car with tendrils that looked disturbingly like fingers. They were no longer running from death. They were being delivered to it. The forest road ended at a clearing where the fog hung thick as cotton, muffling sound and turning the world into a gray void. Sarah's car rolled to a stop in front of what appeared to be an abandoned rest area, weathered picnic tables scattered across cracked asphalt, a bathroom building with boarded windows, and an information kiosk whose posted signs were too faded to read. "Engine won't start," Sarah said, turning the key repeatedly. The starter clicked uselessly, and even the headlights began to dim. Marcus opened his door, and the silence hit him like a physical force. No insects chirping, no wind rustling the leaves, no distant highway noise. Even their own breathing seemed muted and strange. "Look at this," Jake called from the information kiosk. The wooden structure was older than it had appeared from the car, its paint peeling and wood dark with age. But the metal plaque mounted on its front was new, gleaming as if it had been installed yesterday. Rest Area 447, Marcus read aloud. Dedicated to those who missed their final destination. Below the inscription was a list of names, etched in precise lettering. At the bottom, 3 names that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Marcus Chun, Sarah Mitchell, Jake Rodriguez. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "How can our names be here?" The fog began to part, revealing more of the clearing. What they had taken for scattered picnic tables were actually something else entirely: stone markers. Like miniature tombstones, each one bearing a date and a brief inscription. March 15th, 2019. The elevator always stops at the 13th floor. June 3rd, 2021. The bridge was supposed to hold their weight. October 31st, 2023. The costume party that became a funeral. Jake moved from marker to marker, his voice growing more strained with each reading. These are all about people who died. People who thought they escaped something. At the center of the clearing stood a larger structure, not quite a monument, not quite a building. It was made of the same dark stone as the markers, but its surface was polished to a mirror finish. As they approached, Marcus could see their reflections multiplied infinitely in its faceted sides. But they weren't alone in the reflections. Standing behind each of them was the tall, thin figure they'd glimpsed at the airport and hotel. In the reflection, its features were clearer, a face that was almost human but stretched wrong, with eyes that held the depth of empty space and a mouth that curved in something that might have been a smile. "Don't look directly at it," Marcus said, though he couldn't explain why he knew this was important. "Only look at the reflections." In the mirror stone, the figure behind Sarah raised one elongated finger to what passed for its lips, a gesture for silence. Then it pointed toward a path that led deeper into the woods, where more stone markers disappeared into the fog. Sarah's reflection began to move independently, walking toward the path even though Sarah herself stood perfectly still. Jake's reflection followed, then Marcus's. In the stone surface, they watched themselves being led away by their own mirror images. "We need to get back to the car," Marcus said. But when he turned around, the clearing had changed. The Honda Civic was gone, replaced by an old bus with Charter Express painted on its side. Through its windows, Marcus could see the ghostly outlines of passengers, dozens of people sitting in perfect rows, all facing forward, all perfectly motionless. The bus door opened with a hydraulic hiss. "No," Sarah said, backing away. "We're not getting on another vehicle. We're not going anywhere that thing wants us to go." But the clearing was shrinking around them, the fog pressing closer, the stone markers multiplying until they formed a maze with only one exit, the path the reflections had taken. Jake's phone buzzed with a final message. "The game ends where it began. Gate 13. As if summoned by the words, the sound reached them through the fog, a familiar voice making an announcement. "Now boarding Flight 447 to Denver. All passengers please report to Gate 13. The voice was coming from deeper in the woods, where the path led through an archway formed by 2 trees that had grown together in an impossible configuration. Beyond the arch, airport lighting flickered through the fog. "It's bringing us back," Marcus realized. "Everything we've done, everywhere we've run, it's all been to bring us back to Gate 13. The bus door closed behind them as they walked toward the tree archway. But Marcus could still hear the passengers inside, dozens of voices whispering in unison. The manifest was wrong. You were supposed to be on this flight. The path through the arch led not to more forest, but to a familiar corridor lined with uncomfortable blue chairs and departure boards that flickered with impossible information. They were back at O'Hare Airport, but it was wrong, too empty, too quiet, with shadows that moved independently of their sources. Gate 13 waited at the end of the corridor, its boarding area bathed in the same sickly fluorescent light they remembered. But now there was only one flight on the departure board, scheduled for a time that didn't exist. Flight 447 to final destination, boarding now. The gate agent was the same woman from that afternoon, but her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. She gestured toward the jet bridge with movements that were just slightly too fast, too mechanical. "Boarding passes, please," she said in a voice like autumn leaves. "You've kept us waiting long enough." Behind them, the path back to the forest had vanished, replaced by a wall of impenetrable fog. There was nowhere left to run. The game was over. The jet bridge stretched before them like a throat, its white walls curving away into darkness. Gate 13's boarding area had emptied except for the three of them and the agent, whose smile never wavered as she waited for their boarding passes with infinite patience. Marcus felt in his pocket and found it there, a boarding pass he'd never printed, for a flight he'd refused to take. Sarah and Jake had them too, appearing in their hands like magic tricks they hadn't asked to see. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, staring at the paper that bore her name in perfect typography. "How is this possible?" The gate agent's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. "Time isn't linear here, dear. The end was always the beginning." As they walked down the jet bridge, Marcus noticed that their footsteps echoed strangely, as if they were walking on hollow ground. The walls were covered with departure information for flights that had never existed, destinations that weren't on any map. Flight 237 to afterward, Flight 666 to nevermore, Flight 13 to eternity. The aircraft waited at the end of the bridge, but it wasn't the Boeing 737 they had avoided earlier. This plane was older, its metal skin worn smooth by countless journeys to places that existed only in the spaces between seconds. Through the windows, Marcus could see other passengers already seated, the elderly couple from the airport, the businessman with his phone, the family with 2 children. All the people who had boarded Flight 447 that afternoon. But they were different now. Their faces were serene, their eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. They had found their rest. "Your seats are in the back," said the flight attendant, a woman whose uniform was perfectly pressed despite being decades out of style. Her name tag read Helen, in service since always. The cabin stretched impossibly long, with rows upon rows of passengers from different eras. A man in a 1940s suit sat next to a teenager with modern headphones. A woman in Victorian dress shared an armrest with someone wearing a NASA t-shirt, all united by the same peaceful expression, the same sense of having finally arrived where they belonged. Their seats were indeed in the back 3B and 3C, just as their original boarding passes had indicated. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that they had spent so much effort avoiding these exact seats, only to end up in them anyway. As they settled in, Marcus felt an unexpected calm wash over him. The terror and confusion of the past hours faded like a nightmare upon waking. This was where they had always been meant to be. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, familiar yet strange. "We'll be beginning our final descent shortly. Thank you for flying with us, and welcome to your true destination." Through the window, Marcus could see they were already airborne, though he hadn't felt the plane take off. Below them, the lights of cities formed patterns that looked like constellations, beautiful and infinite. He realized with a start that he could see all of it, every person who had ever lived, every choice that had led to this moment, every thread in the vast tapestry of existence. Sarah reached for his hand, and Jake grasped his other. They were together, as they had always been, as they would always be. "The premonition," Marcus said softly. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The plane banked gently to the left, turning toward a light that grew brighter with each passing moment. Not harsh like the airport's fluorescence, but warm and welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. In the seat pocket in front of him, Marcus found a final message printed on airline stationery. Death is not the opposite of life. It is the completion of it. As the light enveloped the aircraft, Marcus understood at last. They hadn't cheated death that day at Gate 13. They had simply been given time to understand that some destinations are inevitable. Some journeys must be completed. The plane dissolved into brightness, carrying its passengers not to an ending, but to a beginning none of them could have imagined. Back in the abandoned rest area, 3 stone markers appeared among the others, their inscriptions fresh and clear. September 12th, 2025. They thought they could change their destination. The fog swirled around the markers briefly, then settled into stillness. And in Chicago O'Hare Airport, Gate 13 stood empty once again, its departure board flickering with a message that only certain people could see. Your flight is now ready for boarding. Please proceed to the gate when your time comes. Some said that late at night, when the airport was nearly empty, you could still hear the echo of boarding announcements that called no earthly flight. A reminder that all journeys, no matter how long or circuitous, eventually lead us home.